we're given, an enormous amount of sensory perception that can allow us to have incredible pleasure. There is so much available. And I'm not only talking sexual pleasure, I'm just talking sensual aliveness and engaging with smell and touch and taste. And, there is so much that we have available to us that we're not using to our fullest.
Hello, and welcome to our podcast, the place where we discuss the ways in which we are growing and evolving, hopefully, Rachel.
Yes.
I'm Nisa Oz.
And I am Jill Herzig. And I think one of the interesting things that comes up in conversations when we're podcasting, but also just in our friendship and in our life, you bring it around to sex, girl.
Jeez.
You do.
Always. We just had this conversation a few minutes ago with Alicia, our producer. And she's like, you only want to talk to guests who talk about sex or God. And that's it. And I was like, what else is there? And seriously.
It's true. It's true.
I know.
And
everything else bores me.
I think it's because you are a very sexually connected person. Welcome to our Oversharing podcast. But I think that I sense this about you. And I also feel like you kind of naturally want to get to the honest place with people. And it's a shortcut, right, to an honest place.
Sometimes.
Spirituality is as well.
Sometimes it can be a shortcut to a lying place too. But it's just anyway, it's my jam, which is why I'm so excited for our guest today. We are talking to Michaela Boehm, the queen of sex. She's intimacy and relationships. And her most recent book, The Wild Woman's Way, Unlock Your Full Potential for Pleasure, Power, and Fulfillment. Thank you so much for being with us today. We are so honored to have you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I like the idea that you talk about sex all the time.
I don't actually talk about it. It's just what I'm just thinking about it.
And she just, it's just a very natural way. Anytime the door is just even slightly open, slightly cracked to the subject of sex, Lisa will walk right through and talk about it.
I'm just the queen of the double entendre. But I do think because it's something bigger, I do think it's a way to the transcendent. And you are an expert in Tantra, as well as being a psychotherapist. And so for me, it's like, and on the one respect, I think it's common in our conversations and what I think about. But I think because it's so much bigger and deeper than we even realize in our society.
Let's talk first about how disconnected we've become from our bodies and our sexuality, and then we'll go deeper into the sex part. But how did we lose that connection?
Well, I think there's some very big considerations, and I agree with you with the the body being a part of the sacred and the transcendent and an offering and a creative spark and life force. And with that, of course, sex and procreation and creativity. You don't have to have a baby to be wildly creative as a human being, right? But it all comes from the same place, and that place is the body. And the body really is a premier decision-making tool, is what I sometimes call the body, right? Meaning we have so much wisdom in the body because the body was built to make us survive. And so we have an enormous amount of sensory data and sensory perception and power in the body that we're no longer using. And so one of the reasons, and you, as you're saying, we're very disconnected. So there's two things that happen. There is lack of use, and then there is also disconnection. And I'll talk about both of them. So lack of use has to do with the fact that, of course, nowadays, our lives are no longer such that we are in physical survival, for most of us, right, in the West, as we're sitting here. We're not wondering where the evening meal is picked from or hunted from, or things of that nature, right? The neighboring tribes are not right at the door at the moment, right?
No, the door to Whole Foods swings wide open and it's
The
all
door to
right
Whole Foods
there.
swings wide open, and most of us can get food delivered, and so on, right? So there is not so much imminent threat to one's survival, and also the way we live now, and the way life is set up. A lot of the faculties that kept us alive for millions of years, essentially, are no longer needed as much. And so our spidey senses, so to speak, are not used and trained and worked with as much as in the olden days, so to speak. Right, so there's that whole area. Then the other area, though, is that we always have access to the signals our body sends, because our body is always scanning and always aware of our surroundings and always alive with sensory exchange, right? And so when we talk about sex and relationship and the body, we're talking about an engagement with the body via the senses with then another human being, right? And so one of the main things, and this answers your question as to why are we so disconnected, is that we're human beings and we're subject to overload. So we can only perceive so much before we have to shut down and kind of clench down input, because we only can deal with so much at once. And we live in a time, particularly now with all the social media and cell phones and electronic input and all of that, where just the sheer volume of sound and light and input and information coming and going is such that there isn't much space for much else, really.
Yeah,
Right?
you
Because
had a phrase in your book that really stuck in my mind, which was our bodies are stuck in go.
yes,
Stuck in go
exactly.
mode.
Yes,
And
yes,
and can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I immediately related to it. I
yes,
I actually felt it in my body. I thought that's right. That's what this sensation is. But um
yes.
intellectually, I still want more on that.
Yes. So we're overwhelmed, which means we have to shut down the signals our body sends. Right? That's number one. So we don't actually notice how disembodied we are because we can't hear
Because
it.
we're answering that email and returning that
And
text and returning
exactly,
that
and
Snapchat and
that's right. And it's loud. And then furthermore, you're sitting. So your body is parked. When you sit, your body isn't supposed to be active, right? So you essentially park yourself, and what's now active is from the neck up. Hence, by the way, we have neck and shoulder and jaw and tension issues, headaches, all of those kind of things, because all the energy goes from the body up where it's needed. Type, text, look, talk, right? So that's the kind of overwhelm part. And then go is essentially the outcome of that, where you focus externally to get things done. And there's a lot of things to get done, a lot more things than ever. I don't know how you grew up, but I grew up in fairly rural Austria, where at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, every shop closed and didn't open back up till Monday morning. And people actually rested on the weekend. You couldn't get anything done after 6 in the evening and after 11 on Saturday. And so actually there was a work-life balance, so to speak. That's no longer the case. Most people work full on, and then they do their laundry, their banking, their whatever, right, at night. And then they watch TV and so on and so on and so on. So the go is the predominant mode we're in. But as women, it's different for men. They also suffer, right? But as women, because we're built to actually grow humans in our bodies, a lot more emphasis in the body for the survival and procreation aspects is down in the lower body, in the hips, in the thighs, in the genitals. There has to be blood flow. There has to be aliveness. There's a lot more happening there. And of course, hormones do that too. So when we squeeze up and forward, we lose our body sensation and we lose our pleasure. And go is very addictive, right? Once you're in go, it's like you are revving and that rev needs to go somewhere, and then stopping from go into flow, which what I call it in that case, which is the part of us that connects to our body, that is sensually alive, sexually alive, creatively prolific, is very, very difficult, because you have to reverse the flow of energy from up and out and forward to in and down into kind of a swirling, undulating, non-linear kind of engagement. And that's very hard for most of us.
When we come back, I want to delve deeper into this idea, and maybe you could share some techniques on how we can go from go to flow.
Tickets for our 2022 iHeartRadio Music Festival are on sale now at AXS.com. See Halsey, Megan Thee Stallion, Nicki Minaj, Sam Smith, Black Eyed Peas, Diplo, and so many more, all on one stage.
Iconic names from all genres of music.
Avril Lavigne,
Lionel Richie, LL Cool J,
Luke Combs,
Marcus Mumford,
Maren Morris,
Morgan Wallen,
Pat Benatar,
The Black Keys. A weekend full of superstar performances, never seen before collaborations, and once-in-a-lifetime moments you'll have to see to believe.
Friday, September 23rd and Saturday the 24th at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas.
iHeartRadio, let's go!
Our 2022 iHeartRadio Music Festival.
Buy your tickets now at AXS.com. That's AXS.com.
Before the break, we were talking about getting stuck in go, that place where it's all externally focused energy. Can you share with us how we get into flow, which is what you were recommending?
Yes. And the good news is we're naturally built for flow. So for most of us, it's much harder to achieve and maintain strong go than it is to go back into flow, because flow is kind of where we live, and it's in a certain way our birthright, as is pleasure. Because we're built for that full-bodied engagement, and that's what also keeps us alive as a species, right? Because that's how we birth babies and all those good things. So there is a few really, really simple techniques. And, it's really funny because you were talking about things I mentioned in the book. One of my real desires in the book was to have a whole pack of super simple exercises that you can do in a few minutes. Because what, of course, is so insane about being in go is that when you now have to do something to get from go to flow, that's still a doing.
It is. It's like a catch-22 loop.
It's a catch-22. So what I do for myself, and we've talked about this a bit before we get started with the show, right? I travel an enormous amount of time. So all these things are essentially road tested, very, very extensively road tested. One of the easiest and quickest ways to get back into flow is to actually move your lower body.
All right, so give me, I help our listeners. This is one of those moments where it's a non-visual medium. Help me see what we're doing here. Is this like a belly dance?
Can you do it? Jill, I want you to stand up and do it.
I'm wiggling around in my chair. This doesn't come naturally to me at all. I was saying to Lisa, I don't even have hips, so I'm not sure.
Yes. Well, yes, you do. And yes, you can use them. And what you just did would be a good way. So I'll give you 3 ways to do it. So if you're seated and you really can't get up, like on an airplane or you're in a meeting and things are starting to get really, really stuck, you can do exactly what you did. Is you can kind of do a little bit of a wiggle from right to left of your hips, or do like little hip circles in your chair. And of course,
we are wiggling, everyone. Yes, we are wiggling. We are figurating and wiggling.
Yes. And so the interesting thing about that is that it doesn't take much, right? So all you really need to do is feel your thighs and feel your hips and feel your lower body, and the energy will go where the attention goes. That's how it is in the body. So if you can do better than wiggling in your chair, which is preferable, like let's say at the end of the day, or before a date, or before you want to engage in some kind of embodied exploration, you'll just stand. You can put a piece of music on for this, or or not, and you put your feet hip width apart, and you just start making hip circles as if you had an imaginary hula hoop. Right.
So I can see our producer, Alicia, doing a little wiggle in her chair right now. Everyone's wiggling here. Okay.
So you start with hip circles, and then you can do figure eights. If you want to be very creative, you can write your name with your hips, or, any which way. And you just keep your hips moving while bending your knees just a tiny little bit. So you don't want to do that with your knees hyperextended, of course. But also if you bend the knees a bit, the thighs get activated. And that activation of the thighs really brings the energy down. And it's so simple. And I used to teach this in boardrooms and all kinds of places where people really are not down with hip circles, right?
To be a fly on the wall in the boardroom. Yes. And you're getting men to do this too? You're saying to the guys in the room, like, shake it.
Well, with the guys, when I'm working just with guys, we often do bouncing. This is the other thing you can do if you, for whatever reason, don't feel comfortable with hip circles, or you're wearing a pencil skirt or something like that. You can just have feet hip width apart, and then put your hands on your hips, and then or let them hang by your side. It's up to you. And then what you do is you just bounce up and down by bending and straightening the knees. And what you can imagine is that you're bouncing all the tension from the head and the shoulders and the neck down. And it kind of, by each bounce, it goes a little bit further down, and then it kind of falls, off the bottom.
And what do you do when a little inner voice says, Jill, you look like an idiot? What do you say to that inner voice? Or I'm sorry, I have to level set for everyone here. I am like a lifelong jogger. I wrecked my knee, so I do Pilates. Pilates is all about drawing it in and keeping it tight. I need so much help in this area before I can, and part of it, I think, is mental, is let it go, Jill. You can do this. Who cares what you look like? Dance like no one's watching. So what's the instruction to the nasty inner voice?
To the inner critic?
I think first of all, get in touch with her wild side. You talked about the wild woman's way. Jill needs a little more of that wildness.
I'm engaged in the Pilates woman's way, and I don't know. I want, but this, I will say that reading your book, I really thought I was going to struggle with this because of what I've just admitted, and instead I felt very, very intrigued by it.
Well, that's very good, because it's in you, and it's normal to feel a bit strange about these things for many reasons. One of which, of course, is we have all had some experience of it not only looking stupid, right, but also potentially not being safe. And so, of course, you do these things in the privacy of your own home when no one's watching.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, that as women, kind of standing there and letting it all go and really sort of swinging your hips around and getting in touch with your sensuality.
Yeah.
You do that out in the world, and you might attract...
And you get some money put in your phone.
Absolutely. So a lot of women I've worked with who work, day jobs in big offices or so, they go into the handicapped bathroom stall, put an iPod on or something like that, and move for a few minutes, or just bounce up and down when no one can see you. It is important to understand that we have a built-in mechanism to keep ourselves safe, and a display of our hips and our sensuality and aliveness in public is dangerous, in the worst case scenario. In the best case scenario, it's embarrassing. Of course, if you live in California, nobody cares, but in some parts of California. But But so what you do is you do it at home, and you say to your inner critic that it's for the good of, so to speak, for the good of all beings, including your partner, your children, yourself, to have more life and more fullness in the body. Because, we're not just talking pleasure and sex here. We're talking intuition, and we're talking free available energy to actually do the things we want to do. All of that sits down there in the hips and the belly and the thighs, because that's the power center, right? It's like the generator of our creativity. And with that, the doing that doesn't just come from the head. And so when you just engage a tiny little bit every day, it's so simple. Most people don't think it makes a difference. And most people within a week report a marked difference in the way they feel in their body.
Interesting.
I'm getting on board. I am. And I don't care what my children
You're going to
see
be the
when they catch me
feral
doing
Jill
this.
when I see you next time.
Exactly.
Can we talk a little bit about your process of rewilding? You say there are 4 aspects to it. The embodiment, sensualization, sensitization, relaxation, and release. Can you walk through those a bit?
Yes. So, I've been teaching this for over 20 years and have been at it myself for over 30 with this particular inquiry, because I'm by nature very driven and very heady and very effective. And so very, very effective, meaning I can get an enormous amount of stuff done within a day. And my body will suffer the consequences if I'm not constantly maintaining a balance there. And so the things I found is that essentially those 4 aspects, when used and when you know what they are, it's fairly easy to do it. And it's not a time-intensive thing, because the first step is, of course, that you come in touch with your feelings and your sensations. And that's what makes us connected back to our body. You have to kind of imagine that the body has a constant voice that always is there. But when it's loud, like let's say we're at a rock concert, and the 3 of us are speaking, we have to scream to hear each other. But then, of course, if we go into a library, that same noise level is going to be considered obscenely loud. And so when we constantly drown out the messages of our body, what we essentially can do is bring the noise level down. And then we can hear these things clearly, and we're connected. So sensitization is the engagement with those sensations by becoming more sensitive to the body. And there's a variety of ways to do that, like with the hip circles. There's another practice. You were talking earlier about maybe speaking about nonlinear at some point. So there's a nonlinear movement practice. I'll explain that in a moment, where you just move with whatever you're feeling. And so you're translating your internal sensations externally by knowing what you're feeling and by moving what you're feeling. So that's sensitization. Then relaxation, of course, also plays a big part in there, because the more tense we are, the less we can feel. And as you well know, arousal and stress and tension in the body are directly opposite, right? And so the more relaxed and open your body is, the more available a sensation you have, and the more arousal and the more creativity can come forth. So there's all kinds of ways you can relax the body, passively and actively, of course. And then there is release, which is also very, very important, because a lot of us have a lot of backlog. And in the backlog, it's like sludge on the bottom of a gas tank or something like that. And it makes us...
Is backlog physical? Is it psychological? Is it something we're storing in the body?
Okay. All of the above. Backlog can be physical stuff that you haven't dealt with, that you can't even hear or feel. It can be emotions, which it mostly is. Past traumas, old hurts, heartbreaks, anger, resentment. all the things that we stuff down. When you stuff it down and you stuff it down, you stay functional. And at some point, it's like a beach ball being pushed underwater. At some point, you can't hold it down anymore, and it pops up. And when it pops up, people have panic attacks, or they get very, very sad and depressed, or they have, fight or flight, old trauma comes up. All kinds of things can happen when we don't release the things that we're dealing with on a regular basis. And there's ways to do that through talk therapy or talking with a friend. There's, of course, crying, always good. And then there's moving your body. You're making a face when I said crying. Yeah, not always the most appropriate thing to do, right?
No, I'm all for a good cry.
Ever so often a good cry will wash it all out, and then you can do movement to release.
When we come back, I want to actually talk about sex.
Tickets for our 2022 iHeartRadio Music Festival are on sale now at AXS.com. See Halsey, Megan Thee Stallion, Nicki Minaj, Sam Smith, Black Eyed Peas, Diplo, and so many more, all on one stage.
Iconic names from all genres of music.
Avril Lavigne,
Lionel Richie, LL Cool J, Luke Combs, Marcus Mumford,
Maren Morris,
Morgan Wallen,
Pat Benatar,
The Black Keys. A weekend full of superstar performances, never seen before collaborations, and once-in-a-lifetime moments you'll have to see to believe.
Friday, September 23rd and Saturday the 24th at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas.
iHeartRadio, let's go!
Our 2022 iHeartRadio Music Festival.
Buy your tickets now at AXS.com. That's AXS.com.
Okay, so we were talking about the rewilding and the process. You have the four aspects of the rewilding. But I do want, since I said we were going to talk about sex, I do want to get into sex. And I kind of want to take it from a different angle, because Jill and I have talked about this before. Somehow at 50, and I don't know if you're a woman of a certain age yet, but at 50, people just decided, it's like, okay, you don't have to have sex anymore. You're invisible. You're not considered a sexual entity anymore. And I think part of the whole...
It's amazing how easily people just divest from it. It's the weirdest thing.
I know. Well, a lot of our friends don't want to have sex anymore.
Yeah,
it's not a part of their relationship.
Yeah.
But I was just, the whole rewilding thing, the thing about the wild woman is she's not necessarily a nubile 18-year-old wild woman. You can be a middle-aged wild woman, I think, and embrace that aspect of yourself. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yes. Well, I want to say, because wild woman, sometimes people get very confused. I'm not talking about wild as in crazy, foaming at the mouth, fangs and claws. I'm talking as wild as in it's a Jungian archetype, right? So it's connected to nature. Our original nature, meaning who we are when all the labels and the layers and the coping mechanisms are peeled away, and also our connection with nature within our bodies and around us. That, of course, is present in every age. And there's also something really, really valuable in understanding that the cycles of nature run through our bodies, and that there's a wisdom in the way we were built, so to speak. And so every season of the wild woman might look a bit different, but they all have the same aspects, which is reconnecting to who we are, and reconnecting with our body, and with that, the power and the pleasure and the intuition we have. And so when we look at being in our 50s, I'm about to turn 52, right? We're actually in a really interesting position. And I've particularly recently, because, when you start getting into that age, there isn't much out there anymore to look for or look up to, and like you said, people close shop, so to speak, right? And some people just hold on for dear life to the younger years, and some people just give up. And there's a lot of confusion, and there's not a lot of good role models. And I think that when you really look at it from a cyclical viewpoint, one of the good things about being in your 50s is you just don't give that much of a damn anymore.
Yeah.
Because you can't. Because you wake up, you look
You don't
in the
give
mirror,
any more shits.
you can't. You just can't, because things are no longer the way that you thought they would be. And
No.
in our 50s, most of us had at least a few, if not a series of heartbreak and losses and experiences. So for the most part, it's actually an opportunity to be freer and to be more expressed and to be more expressive of who we really are and not have to conform so much anymore.
I actually think that younger women have, perhaps the context is different, but they struggle the same way because there are so many social constructs about what it means to be a young sexual woman, and they are trying to live up to those models, and they're in go mode around achieving some ideal of being a hot young thing. And I honestly think that they are as sort of blocked in this way as
we all have issues.
We're all struggling.
I'm not saying that women in every age struggle with the same things, but you were specifically asking about over 50.
Yeah.
Younger women, there's massive things that we never had to deal with. I mean, can I just say Tinder, right? I mean, all that comes with that, and the externalization and the objectification that not only is put upon us from the outside, but from the inside. And there's an enormous amount of struggle with the body and the expression and, having to be everything for everyone and all of that. But when we speak specifically about the 50s, and then we talk about sex at every age, what we're looking at is that essentially we can be ourselves because how do they say, everybody else is taken? And that becomes very clear when your body starts doing strange things, that you'll just have to be with it. And what I find with sex, and I've worked with women for a long time, and women, sometimes it's very lovely. Sometimes when I do women's events, we have mothers, daughters, and grandmothers. They come together often. And so you have an 18-year-old, like a 40-something-year-old and a 60-something or 70-something-year-old that are related, and you can see the different expressions of that. And most women, if they're really, really honest, stop having sex, not because they're no longer sexual beings, but because there's so many other things that play into that, subtle resentments, not feeling good in the body, being disconnected, having so much to do, it's just another chore, never having really fully had really good pleasure. So when it's not that great, why would you, participate, and all of those kind of things. And so when we look at sex, what we're really looking at is our connection to our own sensuality and then sexuality. And you can be very, very sensually alive and not necessarily sexually active, or you can be very sexually active and not be sensually alive. And you can, of course, be sensually very alive and sexually active with yourself or a partner. That's entirely up to you. But it's an engagement with the senses. And you were saying at the very beginning, I don't know if it was recorded or not, is there anything else to talk but sex and God? Well, there kind of isn't, and there is, in the sense that there's beauty, right? So I would say beauty, sex, and God. Beauty as a creative spark or a creative force. And then there's sex as the entirety of the creative expression. And God as the entirety of our connection with the divine, however we understand that. And our bodies and our sensual sexual expression are a direct connection to beauty, sex, and God. Because how else would we know about these things? Other than through the senses, and through our senses connecting deeply with the world around us and our partners and our children and our animals. So sex starts with the senses, right?
Yeah.
And it starts with being alive in the senses.
And I don't think, when I say sex, but I joke about it, but I think we live in a society where we've sex has actually become less important, not more, because when you talk about the connection between sensuality and sexuality, the erotic can be in picking up a glass of water. And
That's right.
that energy, the polarity of the masculine, feminine energies, and the appreciation of sensation doesn't have to be singularly in the sexual act. And I think that's where I feel sorry for younger generations who now have Tinder or porn on demand, because this sex has been robbed of its real significance, which is in every aspect of life.
Yes. I always call it the everyday sacred, right? And that's that to me is really the reason for my existence in a certain way, is to bring the sacred into the ordinary and the ordinary into the sacred, so to speak. And so, yes, the way you pick up a glass of water, or the way you sit on your desk and how your desk is arranged, can be equally important and sensual and alive than the most sublime sex act. And the key and the secret, so to speak, to the most sublime sex act is that your body is already sensually alive and open. And so when you go from being numb all day because you're stuck in that go thing and you don't even notice your surrounding, and then you want to engage romantically or erotically, the gap between 0, totally shut down, and let's say 100 most sublime opening, heart opening, body ecstatic orgasm is a huge gap. And that's a gap that, if you then expect your partner to bridge that gap, for instance, that partner is probably going to fall short, because it's going to be a long road.
All right, so help me, because I'm the practical shoes person. I transitioned from my office on a New York City subway. That is not a sensual experience. And
you
then,
can make it a sensual experience.
Okay, how? And how does that not get dangerous or disgusting?
No, it's not sexual. It has to be sensual.
It's not sexual. So in the very, very back of my book, there's these sensuality hacks, most of which you could do on a subway. So here's a few practical things you could do. You could have an essential oil on you so that you smell something good instead of subway, right?
Yes.
You can have a little, those little knobby balls or something like that in your hand and massage your hands. If, that's fairly, nobody will really notice or care.
By the way, I am beyond caring what other people think about me on the subway or anywhere else. But yes, keep going, because I'm loving these. These are very practical.
Meaning, but also from a danger standpoint or so, right? Like massaging your hands with one of those knobby balls, or putting moisturizer on, using your actual commute to do something for your hands, right? Massaging every single one of your fingers and the knuckles, and you could spend the entire subway ride massaging your hands. And by the time you get out of the subway, you've actually done something for yourself. Yeah. Instead of fiddling on the phone, which is not massaging your hands. You could also listen to your favorite music instead of a podcast or...
Oh, no, they should be listening to our podcast.
This particular one.
They should listen to our podcast, but I'm talking about the sensuality thing. By the way, it's very funny, when I do my own podcast, people come up to me sometimes and they go, I walk with you on the beach every day. And this is the funniest thing. So I'm not saying one shouldn't do podcasts, but what I mean is sometimes when you want to transition, you want to get out of your head. You don't actually want to think more. You want to think less. And you want to listen to the podcast on the way to work, so you're sharp and alive and motivated and full, right? And on the way back, you put music on, you massage your hands, you have that little ball, you have some, aromatherapy mist or a little bit of essential oils, and you make it so that everything is a sensual experience. Because guess what? Touching the cold metal in the subway is a sensual experience.
That's
right?
great advice.
It's sensory, sensory input. Output.
Michaela, thank you. I will never look at my commute the same way again. Never, ever. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you.
If you want to connect with Michaela, you can go to her Instagram account. It's at MicBoehm77. That's MicBoehm77. Or go to michaelaboehm.com.
Yes, thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you so much to Alicia Haywood, our producer. Everybody have a great commute and a nice night with whomever you've got at home. And until next time.